I'm Tommy Jansen, just an average guy in my early 40s. Until recently, life felt pretty smooth sailing. I had a happy marriage and no major personal issues. But things changed earlier this year. Despite not considering myself weak, I started noticing my wife exerting more control over our lives, making me question the balance in our relationship. Much of it was my own fault because I had, much too often, chosen the easy way and giving in to her when we had different opinions in something what I regarded as a less important matter. The problem was that I had noted that those different opinions had appeared more often, and it was high time begin to dig in the heels and stop it before they became too common. Sandra, my 39-year-old very pretty wife, used a simple tactic. Fair sex was available at my request and good cooking when things went in her way, and quite the opposite when I had objections and didn't change my mind in her favor. However, the main reason for me to choose the easy way had usually been that I was too busy to care about all those daily matters. I was working as engineer at the local branch of a nationwide construction company in the county capital, and we were usually very busy at my job. During the summers, the first spent some time at the golf club, which Sandra didn't like very much. The last year, I even spent much time at the Ryder Club stable where our 13-year-old daughter Lena had her horse, which she had gotten from Sandra's parents. Sandra was afraid of horses, so she demanded that I go there and help Lena taking care of the horse. In the beginning, I didn't like it all, but now Marie-Anne, a good-looking and easygoing mother to one of the other young girls in the club with a horse in a box next to Lena's, had turned my visits there to a great pleasure. When Maria noted that my knowledge of horses was limited to knowing the difference between rear and front end of the animal, she took her time showing me what to do and how to do it. In return, I used to help her with all heavy jobs because her husband pretended to be allergic of horses and refused to come to the stable. We had a very good time together, but only as friends, not any affair in sight so far. I can't deny that my heart went a bit faster when one day she said to me while laughing to some good new, under-the-belt joke I had told her, "I would seduce you within seconds if we were singles." Obviously, she noted some signs of hope in my face because she immediately continued by telling me that for the time being she was very pissed at her husband and asked me, "Are you the same nice guy at home as you seem to be here?" I suggested her try me if we became single, and she promised to do that. Both Sandra and I made good money, so we could afford to have a pleasant life. Thanks to the good bank connections at my job, I had invested in a house in a nice area, where we had many good friends in the neighbor. Many of our friends envied me because they only saw the sunny side of Sandra, who was the perfect hostess when we had a dinner or a party for our friends. Sandra and I met at a line to the check-in desk at the nearest airport during a holiday trip to the Spanish island Mallorca. Both she and I went there with friends, and our parties met in that line, and thereafter a few times at party spots at the island where I got her cell phone number, called her, invited her to dinner for two at a nice restaurant, and afterwards got some quick action against a palm tree in a park. That was the beginning of our love story, which continued even when we were back from the island. She was hot, and both of us were usually more than satisfied after our hot actions. Though Sandra's snobbish friends had accepted being screwed by all kind of men during the holiday in Spain, they didn't accept me as Sandra's boyfriend back home. In Spain, they had no hesitations about screwing with my friends, even those of them with simple backgrounds, and some of Sandra's friends even hired local men for extra excitement. But back home, many of them made no secret of their opinion that what happened on a Mediterranean island ought to stay there forever. Some of them regarded me as trash due to my first name and my background of being grown up in an infamous area of our city. Such simple matters as the area wasn't bad when I grew up there, and my nice job and present way of living didn't mean anything to some of them. To my great pleasure, Sandra never agreed with any of her snobbish upper-class friends in that matter. Though Sandra probably was a trophy for me, I didn't ever see her in that way. For me, she was only a lovely girl who happened to have more wealthy parents than me. After a few months, she had problems with the pills, and her doctor suggested that she skip them for a while. However, screwing like rabbits and forgetting now and then to have condoms at home could only lead to one thing. Her unexpected pregnancy a few months later caused us to quickly marry, as both of us wanted to do that before we had the child. To my relief, her parents had no objections. Sandra was her parents' only child, and they gave her an expensive summer house situated at a very picturesque lake outside our hometown as private property for a wedding gift. As Sandra would get the summer house someday anyway, it was a clever step of her parents to give it to her and get rid of all maintenance problems, which fell on my shoulders. Of course, they could still use it as much as they wanted, even when Sandra owned it. I had owned our house in town before we married and kept that as my private property for compensation for her summer house. We shared everything else, and there was never any talk about my house or your house. I really liked Sandra's parents. They had owned and run a successful furniture factory then sold it for a good price and bought a nice house at Marbella in southern Spain when her father turned 60. I enjoyed our visits there, but Sandra didn't like the hot climate at all, and I understood that we would have some problems if she inherited that house. Sandra worked at one of the leading insurance companies' district office, where she had been recently promoted to some kind of vice department boss for special projects at the district. To my disappointment, I slowly began to find out that it had a negative effect on our marriage. She wasn't the same Sandra as before, and when I asked her about whether she had any problems, she only said that she had so many new things to learn at her job, which was the only reason why she was much more tired than before. But she promised everything would be better as soon as she had got a bit more skilled in that job. Of course, even our sex life began to suffer with her new behavior, though I didn't see any visible signs of an affair. No overtime, no new sexy dressing, and no wrong number calls when I took the phone. The only sign was that she had gotten totally angry when I had joked about her possible affair after a lousy Saturday night sex. She never mentioned much about her job at home, but had been bragging during the last 2 weeks that she was working with a very important contract. Though she said she trusted me 100%, she had not told me any further details about her project. Of course, I knew a lot of what was going on in our city and had my guess about it, but as it wasn't of any main interest for me, I never pushed her in that matter. Then the shit hit the fan one Tuesday evening when Sandra came home from her job. She had a strange look at her face, and I understood at once that something had happened to her and asked, "What's the matter with you? Have you been fired?" Of course not. Quite the opposite, indeed. We've almost closed our big project with a successful deal. I knew her so well that I had immediately saw that something was bothering her. She was far from in a jolly mood for celebrating a successful deal. I said, "Please don't try to make a fool of me. I can tell that there's something that bothers you. Yes, you're in some way right, because I've got one more important project to think about, and it is linked to the first project. Yes, such things happen, so what is the problem? The second project is out of town and needs some traveling and probably even staying overnight now and then. The first trip will be on Friday this week, if you don't mind." I got a strange feeling about a buried dog in her attempts to tell me the good news about a successful deal before she mentioned her main problem, the strange Friday night business, which would make any sane man suspicious. She sounded far from happy about telling me that silly matter, so I asked, "Where to?" Sandra told me the name of a small town on the coast, only 45 kilometers from us, connected to us with a good road, which had me almost falling out of my chair in surprise. Now I began to suspect that she had become involved in some damn crap. However, I still pretended not to know anything further than she had told me and asked, "Stay overnight there when it doesn't take more than a half hour to get home? Our customer's responsible manager can't be there before 5 o'clock, and it will take us a good time to walk around and see the property before we'll have time to sign the first deal. Thereafter, it is my job to be hosting at the dinner my company has invited him to at the Seaside Inn to celebrate the first deal and our further business connections." Nothing strange about that. Though I was sure I knew her reply, I asked, "It depends on what kind of property you, with your education limited to economic matters, are going to see there? It is a large leisure area with 45 holiday chalets." Just what I had suspected the whole time. Sandra had been involved in business with Oscar Pilborg, who obviously had conned the crap out of Sandra and her incompetent boss. I knew Oscar since our childhood because we had grown up in the same area. When he worked as a car salesman, Oscar sold a car to the local slumlord's lesbian daughter, befriended, and married her. After having 2 children, their marriage turned to some kind of strange open marriage, with her having a secret girlfriend and Oscar bragging about having affairs with several, usually married, women at this leisure area where he had a well-equipped chalet. Oscar and his wife had an important agreement to keep all of their affairs out of their hometown. Oscar was very welcome to his rich wife's family because the slumlord's own son wasn't bright enough to be of any advantage in the growing family business. But Oscar was ruthless enough to be the perfect man to fit in that business. As involved in the local construction business as I was, I had heard all the rumors about Oscar's doings and knew that recently he had bought an entire area with about 500 more or less worn-out apartments from the community. They couldn't afford the necessary expensive maintenance and therefore wanted to get rid of the bad reputation of being connected with owning an area in rapid decline to becoming a genuine slum. Oscar never had any such problems. I decided to play in her game for a little while longer and told her, "It seems to be a very strange matter indeed. Will that dinner really take the whole night? How many people are going from your office?" "Only me this time, and there will be some good wine included in such an important celebration dinner." "Do you really want me to be a drunk driver?" "Only you? Do you really believe you have the necessary qualifications to survey those 45 worn-out chalets, which are in very different state of repair? I can come with you and help you with that, of course for free, and drive you home after your dinner." It is not a final survey, just a simple inspection to get some more information about the project. No thanks. In my position, I don't want you involved in my job. And you never heard about taxis. They still exist in this country, and will probably even be cheaper for your company than a room at a decent hotel at the coast. She began to show signs of feeling uncomfortable when she understood that she was painting herself into a corner in our dispute. But she continued, I'll get a guest house in the leisure area for free, and will be paid both for my overtime and a subsistence allowance. Who demands that you go there for a Friday night? Your boss, the customer, or is it your own suggestion? My boss, of course. He had intended to do it himself, but he is busy elsewhere, so he suggested that I represent our company in this very important deal. It will be a great pleasure for me, and there are no reasons for you to interfere in my work. Now I had had enough and shouted, a great pleasure to be screwed by the damn pervert, Oscar Pilborg, and be starring in his sex tapes for as little as a low subsistence allowance. Is sleeping with that pig a condition of your promotion? You ought to know there are candid cameras in Oscar's damn chalet. She was shocked at my shouting and remained silent, so I continued. Oscar used to share his new private sex tapes with his admirers at the golf club, and I'm sure that his latest video with you would be a great show among his admirers. Both Oscar and I were members of the same golf club, where he had bragged about his hidden cameras in the overnight apartment to which he probably had invited Sandra for business discussion. He had a well-equipped private chalet in his leisure area with an office and a guest room with a door to his own bedroom. Once when he had shown pictures to his friends and admirers at the golf club of him screwing a painting business owner's beautiful wife after business negotiations about a maintenance job, he had showed them to me and offered to let me screw her if I became more interested about cooperating with him. I suggested that he take a one-way trip to a hot place. Oscar had bragged loudly that such pictures were the best possible aphrodisiac because the involved woman usually agreed to have sex after she had seen the pictures and received his word of honor that only he and nobody else would ever see those pictures if she was a good girl the next time he wanted to have a date with her. Of course, not all of those women he screwed in the chalet were blackmailed to do that, because many of them enjoyed having sex with an infamous man like Oscar, and many of them volunteered to join his sex sessions. I was a bit surprised that he dared to try his tricks on my wife, Sandra, but it could be a revenge move against me because my company had refused to do any kind of cheap and unapproved jobs for him. He held me responsible for that and had made some sour comments about paying back with interest when we had met at the golf club. Many of Oscar's dirty tricks were well known among people in the business and ought to have been known even by Sandra's boss. The knowledge that the creep who was her boss somehow had succeeded in persuading my prudish wife to spend a night in Oscar's chalet for getting that contract almost knocked me to the floor. She wasn't stupid and ought to understand what a night with Oscar must mean for her. Now she sat sobbing at the table. It is not what you think. It is not anything like that. No, it is much worse, probably a hell of a mess. But remember, if you want to screw that damn pervert Oscar, you can forget this marriage. Do you understand? She didn't reply, so I shouted with a loud voice, do you understand that screwing with Oscar will terminate our marriage? She nodded. I took the phone book, rang Oscar's mother, introduced myself as a childhood friend, and got his secret home number and dialed it. His wife replied, Emily Pilborg. I told her my real name and that I was a construction engineer who had an important business matter to discuss with her husband, and asked her politely if my friend Oscar was at home. When she told me that he was at the golf club, I thanked her for the information. I told Sandra, still loudly sobbing, that I had some important business to handle and started out the door. Sandra was still obviously in shock because I hadn't reacted in my usual soft manner. It was a new and unexpected experience for her. But what could I do? I felt like the camel which had its back broken by the last straw. When I opened the car door, she had opened the entrance door and shouted after me, don't do anything stupid and harass Mr. Pilborg. I'll file for divorce if you dare to do that. I went straight to the golf club, got information about what time Oscar with two others had begun to play, and expected him to be somewhere at 14 or 15 and started walking at that direction. They were at the green of number 15, and when Oscar saw me in the distance, he understood my errand. He threw his club to the ground and began to run away from me. It took me almost 100 meters to catch him and get him down. I didn't waste any time arguing with him. I did my very best to beat the crap out of him. He had damaged or destroyed my marriage, and he deserved to get paid with interest. I knew that I had only a very limited time to do that before his friends and other players put a stop to it. So I really did my best to give him a memorable day, which he never would forget. A couple of hard hooks to his face had put him down on the ground, and then I used the remaining time until I was interrupted by kicking his balls. I interrupted the kicking when his friends and some other players came to us. I told them not to try to stop me when I walked away against the clubhouse where I had left my car. A police car with two young policemen stood waiting for me there. They asked me in a polite manner if I preferred to have it done the easy way, to which I agreed and got into the back seat of their car. There wasn't much talking during the trip to the police station, where I was taken to a small office where another police officer asked me a lot of questions. I told him my story about my childhood friend, Oscar, who had always envied me for my pretty wife and his intention of demanding that she act as some kind of company 304 for getting his contract. I continued my story with the tale of going to the golf club and how he tried to get me away from the others where he could attack me. To my great luck, I had succeeded in defending myself against his aggressive attacks. I don't think the policeman believed many words of my story, but obviously he didn't care because he wrote down what I had told him. I signed it and was locked in while he contacted a prosecutor. About 5 hours after I had arrived at the golf club for the first time, I was released from the police station and driven back to the clubhouse by a police patrol. I knew that my odds of avoiding a trial were very good indeed, because such cases usually were stacked on a high pile, and if nothing had happened within 2 years, the case would be outlawed. Sandra was still in the kitchen when I came back to the house. She asked me, "Where have you been?" "At the police station." "Police station? What the hell did you do there?" "Not much, only answered their questions about what happened to your friend Oscar at the golf club." Suddenly, she became ashen gray and shouted, "Holy Lord, what have you done to Oscar Pilborg?" "Not my fault that such a creep is so fragile. He attacked me and got taken to the hospital." Of course, that was far from the real truth, but I had to continue to tell my version that I had told the police, just in case they did some investigation at her job and asked what she had told her coworkers. Sandra looked at me, began to sob, and said with a low voice, "I'll sleep in the spare room tonight." I heard her lock the spare room door from the inside. I understood that there had been much happier times in our marriage. She was up early the next morning, and the only thing she said to me before she left for work was that we ought to have a serious talk that evening. I agreed. The first thing I did at my job was to contact the lawyer who used to handle some jobs for the company. He had a reputation of being hard and efficient. We had become friends during the years, and he promised to help me pursue Sandra's employer. A half hour later, he rang me back and said that he had set up a meeting with the district chief at Sandra's job for 2 o'clock the same day. 2 o'clock on the dot, my lawyer and I were shown into the district chief's office where he and Sandra's boss were waiting for us. Obviously, those insurance company directors had a large amount of respect for my lawyer because they agreed to many of my lawyer's statements. Sandra's boss gave a very frightened impression, and my lawyer scared him into agreeing that, though he knew about Oscar's reputation, he had demanded that Sandra go with Oscar for a meaningless survey of the chalets, dining and wining, and thereafter spend the night in the chalet with Oscar. He denied that he ever talked about any sex, but my lawyer replied that even an idiot ought to have understood what Oscar expected. He began sweating when my lawyer accused him of acting as a pimp and told him what penalties our legal system gave people who used women for such purposes. We even signed an agreement, which stated that they canceled the deal with Oscar Pilborg and paid all of the expenses for my lawyer. I'm not sure that I would have gotten anything other than high expenses for myself if we had taken that matter to court, but the district chief of the insurance company knew that the ill will of negative publicity would cost them many times more than our agreement. I'm sure the DC understood that I had done him a big favor when I got them to cancel Oscar's contract, because I'm convinced that Sandra's team had done an incredibly lousy negotiation with the skilled con man, Oscar Pilborg. The DC did understand that their main office had accused him of being responsible for the whole mess of their lousy contract with Oscar, causing heavy red figures in their books. Sandra's incompetent boss was an old friend of his whom he had hired without going the usual way. No sane department boss would let Sandra take care of such difficult matter with a well-known problem maker like Oscar for her first important case. Obviously, both the DC and Sandra's boss had been more impressed with her charm than with her qualifications for the job. If they had received or expected any personal favors from Sandra for her promotion, I presume they ought to be chilled down for a while when they heard about what I did to Oscar. After the meeting, I rang a friend at the insurance company my employer used to cooperate with, and I told him that Oscar Pilborg's bargain insurance on his new slum area had been canceled and would be out on the market again. He promised me a fair bonus if they got the contract. A tease tiger would have been a cute pet compared to what Sandra was when she came home from her job that evening. To be honest, I couldn't catch much of the words she screamed, but I understood that I wasn't a beloved husband in her opinion, at least not for the time being. She packed a suitcase, screamed something about her summer house, and left the house. Our daughter, Lena, was rather scared of her mom's behavior, but as Sandra didn't ask her to go with her to the summer house, she stayed with me without any further questions. We went to the stable where I met Marie Ann, who had a small but visible black eye. She told me that it was her husband who had hit her during an argument about the credit card bills for his net poker. When I had told her that Sandra had moved out to her summer house because I had stopped her from spending a night with a customer in his chalet, Marie-Anne gave me a real bear hug, which ended in our first kiss. I still held her when she asked, "Don't you think we two would have fewer problems if you and me lived together instead of with our spouses?" I replied with a single yes and gave her a new, much hotter kiss. Both of us felt much better after that, and then we knew if both of our marriages crashed, we had an alternative. Back from the stable, I went to my den and checked the burglar alarm at Sandra's summer house. The several years old equipment, which protected doors, windows, and reacted on movements in some places indoors, was connected to the phone line, and as I expected, Sandra was at home and had switched it off. But there was even new equipment at the outside of the house, which I had installed to test how well it worked outdoors in our climate before I had bought several such installations for my work. When something, a car or a human being, was 50 meters from the house, it activated a digital camera, hidden in a faked bird's nest box, which took pictures of the arriving item and sent alarm and pictures to my cell phone via internet. Since this equipment had been a test for my job, Sandra had never asked how it worked when I got her permission to test it there. Though I didn't care much about it, Wednesday and Thursday evenings I knew that her car was the only car outside the summer house. Friday after work, I ran some errands, and then Lena and I went to the supermarket to shop before I fixed some food for us. Sandra had not made any attempts to contact me since she left the house, and I told myself that I wouldn't contact her either. Instead, I looked forward to meeting Marie-Anne at the stable on Saturday. But about 6:30, I got an alarm to my cell phone, and, in the pictures from the camera, I could see a silver metallic Lexus SUV parked next to Sandra's car. As the only such car I had ever seen in our town belonged to Oscar, I knew for sure that now the shit had hit the fan. At the age of 13, it wasn't anything unusual for Lena to be alone at home for a short time, especially not on a sunny summer evening. She accepted that I was gone for a while. There wasn't much traffic at that time, so I was out to the summer house in less than a half hour, where I parked so my car wasn't visible from the house. I sneaked to the house, opened the front door with the key I had on my key ring, and went into the house. In the house, I couldn't see anybody in the large living room but heard a female voice screaming in the master bedroom. I put my cell phone on sound recording and went closer. Outside the room, I heard Sandra screaming, "No, I have never agreed to anything like that." Then a male voice shouted, "Shut up, silly bitch. Max promised me good sex, and I'll teach you what that will mean." Sandra shouted back to him, "Nobody gets my BJ. You have already had something extra." Oscar sounded angry, obviously not used to being disobeyed by his women. "Getting a BJ isn't anything extra. When I say good sex, it means all I want, and I want it now." The next sound from the bedroom was a slapping of something very hard with an open hand and Sandra screaming loud. I had recorded enough and switched the cell phone to camera and choose the best pic mode, which meant taking 9 pictures with one push of the button. Sandra had been screwed by him. Now he had to pay a high price for his cruel beating to stop her resistance and get her to obey his demands. Sandra and Oscar didn't notice when I went into the room, not before they saw the flash from the camera. Both of them were naked on the master bed. By then Oscar, with a black eye and yellow cheek after our last meeting, had a still screaming Sandra lying on her stomach. Before Oscar understood the situation, I had put the phone in a pocket and given him a hard hook to his chin. I continued hitting him with both fists until he lay still and stopped his attempts to protect himself. Though he was awake, he put up no resistance when I took his feet and dragged him out to his car. I laid him in front of the car with the license plate well visible, took up the cell phone from my pocket, switched it to video recording, pushed the button, opened my zipper, and gave him a shower. He made no attempt to escape, not even when he got showered on his face. When I was finished, I told him that if he bragged about screwing my wife to as much as one person, he could be sure to see the shower movie on the internet. Then I shouted to him, "Get your damn bum from this property or I'll smash the car." When he didn't obey immediately, I took a large stone and threw in at the windshield, which shattered, and Oscar jumped into the car. To his good luck, he had left the keys in the car when he arrived so he could drive away without any further damage to his expensive car. Of course, I knew that I had acted as some kind of maniac, but because I hated people who hit and assaulted women, it had felt right for me. It didn't matter that Sandra had acted as a genuine 304. That was no excuse for Oscar to act like a creep of the lowest level. In most people's opinion, I had only given that creep what he deserved. Now it was up to Oscar to keep his mouth shut. If he did that, nobody would ever know what I did to him. Back in the house, Sandra was already in the shower and had its door locked. In the bedroom, I noted that both her and Oscar's clothes were in good order on chairs on each side of the bed. Hardly any trace of an assault at the beginning of their session. I took some pictures, which I could use if Sandra intended to pretend that she had been assaulted the whole time. I took a plastic trash sack and threw Oscar's belongings in that. Thereafter, I wrote a short message to Sandra. Dear Sandra, I promised to divorce you if you screwed the damn pervert Oscar. Now you have what you obviously wanted. Tommy. I guessed that she intended to stay in the shower until I left. So I left with the sack and made my first stop at Oscar's house. The garage door was open, but Oscar's car wasn't visible. I took my sack, went to the front door, and rang the bell. When Oscar's wife opened the door, I gave her the sack and told her the truth about how I had found these things in the master bedroom in my summer house. Then I continued with a less than true story about how, when I entered the house, poor Oscar had left both my naked wife and his belongings behind him when he ran away in a hurry and unfortunately had stumbled on the doorstep and probably hurt himself a bit when he fell. To my surprise, she gave me a smile and thanked me for taking care of his belongings. Back home, I told Lena that her mother and I had problems and would probably live at separate places for the time being, but she could see either of us as much as she wanted. She said that was okay with her because several of her friends were living with such parents, and it usually worked without problems. Afterward, I thought that there would be no harm if Sandra's parents heard my version first. So I rang them in Spain and told them that because I had found Sandra screwing Oscar Pilborg, one of the worst a-holes in town, at her summer house, our marriage was beyond any possible recovery. I even told them that whatever Sandra and I did, Lena was still their granddaughter as much as before. At the stable on Saturday, I told Marie that now I could begin to think of being a single, though it would take 6 months to really be that in legal terms. I told her what I had found at Sandra's summer house. I didn't make any attempts to persuade her to dump her husband because that must be her own decision completely. At home again, I found Sandra sitting at the kitchen table. It was far from one of her best days because she looked to be in a real mess. Of course, she had a good reason to be what she really looked like. She wanted to talk and it was okay with me. I told her that I didn't need any further explanation because I had heard Oscar and her say what I needed to know and it was recorded. What I had seen and gotten on pictures was more than enough evidence of her cheating. She understood that it was not the right time to talk about forgiving, so she saved me from all such attempts. Instead, we solved some of the most important questions about Lena, some other practical and economic matters, and decided to meet after a week and work out a new plan after that. At our next meeting a week later, we found out that we had only a slightly different opinion about most of the matters, and after less than 2 hours, we signed the divorce papers. Afterwards, when she had left the house, I was both relieved and surprised about how easy everything had gone. I couldn't help it but had a strange feeling that Sandra, for some still unknown reason, wanted to get rid of me as much as I wanted to get rid of her. She had no objections about the shared custody of Lena, who had her base in my house and spent as much time as she wanted with Sandra. It took some time for me to understand why Sandra let that a-hole Oscar screw her in the summer house, but then once again I got a clue from the hidden camera outside her summer house, which began to show her boss as a frequent night guest at her place. The knowledge of their affair caused me to call their district chief and ask him about his opinion of a section boss screwing one of the employees and in some way asking her to screw one of their customers. To my surprise, the DC told me that he had already done more than he had to in the matter with Mr. Pilborg, and he didn't care a shit what his employees did on their free time. I told him that I'll find some other solution. 3 days later, I went to the section boss office, accused him of screwing my wife before our divorce and having sent her to Oscar. The silly creep began to laugh and asked me, "So what? What the hell can you do about that?" I showed him what I could do. A fair guess would be that he wasn't able to screw anybody for a long time after that incident, which included several hard kicks to his balls. Before I left, I told him that one word to the police would get the whole sex scandal story to the tabloid newspapers. The only thing that happened after that visit was a call from Sandra, who barked like a mad dog. I limited my replies to a few polite, "Yes, dear," which didn't put her in a better mood. At the stable, I didn't really know what to do with Marianne. Of course, I wanted her to leave her husband and come to my house, but I knew that it had to be her own decision. When she asked me if I had been out dating yet, I told her the truth, that I hadn't. She continued, "What would you say if I left my husband?" "I'd say the best possible solution would be with you. Can I trust you?" "Yes." Nothing more was said on that matter during the entire next week, until she rang me one day at my work. She told me that the local gambling shop owner had called her about her husband's debts and, when she had gone to his job asking him about it, they had become involved in a terrible quarrel, which ended with him threatening to beat the crap out of her when he came home after work, and now she didn't dare go home. I took a well-built carpenter from one of our building sites with me and met her outside her home. She got her 2 children and everything she wanted to bring with her for the time being without any problems. At my house, I let her and her children take over the master bedroom so they could be together during the first night. which must be a difficult experience for all of them. Marie Ann and I had no sex before she had decided to divorce her husband and sign the papers. He intended to fight against it, which is regarded as a demonstration without any real significance. In the meantime, we had reorganized the house, so both of Marie Ann's kids got their own rooms. To our great pleasure, Lena and Therese, who knew each other from the riding club, already acted as sisters in many matters. Her son Alexander and I became friends within a short time. I was his soccer dad. Marie Ann's and mine first sex was a memorable event. We did it so tenderly and so good. She was much more active in her lovemaking than Sandra, and got me to do things it hadn't done in the last 20 years. Marie Ann became so pleased that she began to cry of pure happiness. She told me that during the 5-6 last years her husband had only been interested in getting a quickie now and then when he felt up for that. Both of us admitted that we had been dreaming of that night for a long time before anything happened. It felt like an advantage for both of us that it wasn't our love for each other, which had ended our marriages, and nobody could blame us for finding a new love after our spouses had trashed our marriages. Sandra and I had a long, serious talk when we met at a cafe to resolve some matters about Lena. Though I knew all that I wanted to know about her cheating and never asked her any further questions or wanted to know more about her relationships with Oscar and Max, to my great surprise, Sandra began to confess that destroying our marriage was the most stupid thing she'd ever done in her whole life, and she regretted it like hell because she missed me and our family life so much and knew that she had lost me forever. Her confession was almost a standard office story, which began with Max and her going out for lunch at different restaurants. After a while, they developed a very good personal relationship but had no sex so far. Not until Max had told her that she would be promoted to his vice boss with a fair chance to get his job when he got his expected and almost promised promotion to district chief. They had celebrated it with a lunch at a small hotel where Max had booked a room and they took the afternoon off. She had suffered from remorse when she got home, but the expected promotions and prospect of being the first woman at such a high level at their district office had cooled the worst remorse. She didn't love Max, had no intentions of dumping me, and regarded him only as a very good friend and an important mentor. So their weekly sex became an enjoyable part of the job. Max had heavy economic problems after his divorce and could not resist the temptation when Oscar suggested a big kickback for a good deal with his new problem area insurance. The desperate Max had accepted and immediately got a large amount in advance, which he already had used when Oscar told of his final conditions. To Sandra's horror, they included a night with her. Sandra had refused to do that, but Max had succeeded in persuading her to cooperate after Oscar had threatened to send evidence of Max's corruption to their main office and demand his money back. After my lawyer and I had interfered and got the whole insurance deal canceled, Sandra thought that the whole matter was a moot point. But Oscar had insisted on getting what he already had paid for in advance, and he demanded it on Friday night as they had agreed. Sandra had told Max about Oscar's perversions and refused to have anything further to do with him, and even offered to ask her parents for a loan to pay back his kickback with a fair interest. But Oscar wanted to get even with me and forced Max to tell her that he refused to accept anything else than his already paid night with Sandra. At their Friday lunch, Max had told her that Oscar had agreed to skip all perversions and begged her to be good girl for Oscar this one and only time. She could do it at her own summer house where Oscar didn't have any candid cameras. Though with serious doubt in her own mind, she gave in to Max's begging and had agreed to have that one night with Oscar, but only to save their jobs. I had no reason to doubt her when she told me that evening was the worst mistake in her life, and she still had terrible nightmares about it now. And then though Oscar had not contacted her since a short phone call a few hours later the same evening when he asked about his clothes. She gave me a strange look when I told her that I had convinced Oscar to be a good boy and he would never harass her again, but I didn't give a shit if he did something to Max. She took care of Max for a few days when he was in rather bad shape after my beating. But instead of sex, they had a lot of arguing when she accused him for destroying her marriage, and he accused her of wanting the promotion so much that it made her do things that a faithful wife would have never done. She regretted their affair like hell. Only 2 weeks after my beating of Max, the district chief at her office had a stroke and was replaced with a new chief from their main office. He had investigated Max's deal with Oscar and got rid of Max by giving him a choice between being fired or taking an unimportant job at a small district office in the north. Max promised her that he had never mentioned anything to the new chief about her part in their negotiations with Oscar. Sandra hadn't missed Max for as much as a minute when he left for the north because she had gotten his department boss job. However, after reorganization, it was now a bit less important position. Though she had climbed up to the highest position a woman had ever been at the district office, she confessed it wasn't worth the high price she had paid to get there. A terrible remorse had made her cry during many lonely nights. She even feared for the future at her job and had nightmares about her new district chief because there was something in his behavior against her, which made her suspect that he regarded her as an available 304. Sandra told me that her dream and hope was to get me back, but she had come to understand that was impossible. To her great relief, she had been on 2 dates with a nice guy, and if it developed to a relationship, she intended to tell him the truth and let him decide if it was her background or her future, which was of the main interest for him. If the new district chief made any attempts at her, she would prefer to make a scandal and quit the job. I wished her good luck in her new life. 2 months after Marie Ann and her children had moved together with Lena and me in my house, we were living as a happy family. There was much laughing and giggling all the time in the house. Our family fun on Friday evenings was such a funny event that none children wanted to miss it by visiting their other parent that day. I was a happy man again with a loving wife. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.